There is a tattoo inked into the skin of a 16-year-old boy that reads one word: family. Think about that for a moment. A teenager, young enough that most kids his age were still figuring out what they even believed in, made a permanent decision to write that word on his body. Of all the things a 16-year-old could choose to mark themselves with forever, a symbol, a date, a name, he chose that word: family. And the haunting, unbearable irony of this story is that 8 years later, that tattoo is still one of the primary ways law enforcement asks the public to help identify him, because Will Adams III has not been seen since the night of March 12, 2017. He was 16 years old. He was 5'3" to 5'7", depending on who measured him. He weighed roughly 140 pounds. He had brown hair and brown eyes. And somewhere between the last moment that someone who knew him saw him alive and the morning when the world started to notice he was gone, something happened that nobody has been able to explain. Not in the days that followed. Not in the months. Not in the years. Not in the nearly 8 years that have now passed, each one adding another layer of silence over the question that refuses to go away. What happened to Will Adams? There are places in America that hold grief differently than others. Cities have a kind of anonymous distance from tragedy. Missing persons cases flicker across the evening news between car commercials and weather forecasts, and by the following week, the city has moved on. But small towns are different. In small towns, a disappearance doesn't flicker. It settles. It sinks into the groundwater, into the conversations in the checkout lines at the grocery store, into the way people look at each other a little differently once one of their own goes missing. Because in a town where everybody knows everybody, a disappearance isn't just a tragedy. It's a wound that the whole community carries. Henderson, Kentucky is that kind of place. It sits in the far western corner of the state, on the southern bank of the Ohio River, where Kentucky and Indiana face each other across the water. The river is wide there. Wide and dark and full of currents that the locals know and respect and fear in equal measure. The town has stood on that riverbank for centuries, and its character is shaped by the river the way all river towns are. A little quieter than it looks, a little deeper than it appears, and holding more secrets beneath the surface than any outsider would guess. It was in this town, in the winter turning to spring of 2017, that Will Adams III simply ceased to be present in the world. Before we go further, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy true crime stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. Now, let's go back. There is something particular about the way time moves in the weeks before a disappearance. In hindsight, those ordinary days take on a weight they never had when they were being lived. A Tuesday afternoon that nobody thought twice about becomes, in retrospect, the last Tuesday. A conversation that seemed mundane at the time becomes something someone turns over in their mind for years afterward, wondering if there was something they missed. A look, a phrase, a small and forgotten exchange that might have meant everything. This is how it feels to look back at the days before March 12, 2017, in Henderson, Kentucky. The early part of 2017 was unremarkable in the way that winter usually is in western Kentucky. The Ohio River still ran cold and swollen with winter runoff. The twin bridges connecting Henderson to Evansville, Indiana across the water were a daily rhythm for the people who commuted back and forth between the two states. The downtown strip along North Main Street was quiet in the way that small-town commercial districts tend to be quiet in February and early March. Not abandoned, but patient. Waiting for something. Spring maybe. Or something else entirely. Will Adams was 16 years old in March of 2017. The documents that describe him for law enforcement purposes reduce him to measurements. Height, weight, hair color, eye color, identifying marks. But those measurements are not a person. They are the outline of a person, the shape of a life. And the first thing to understand about this story is that before Will Adams became a case file, before he became a name in a national missing persons database, before he became the subject of a search that would go on and on without resolution, he was simply a kid. A teenager living in a small Kentucky river town, navigating the ordinary and extraordinary pressures of being 16 in America. What does it feel like to be 16 in a place like Henderson? It feels, by most accounts, like the world is both too small and too large at the same time. The town is small enough that there are no strangers, Every face is a familiar face. Every name connects to a family, a history, a reputation. That familiarity can be a comfort. It can also feel, depending on the day, like the walls are closing in. Teenagers in small towns carry a particular kind of restlessness, the awareness that there is a larger world beyond the bridges and the riverbanks, and the friction of not yet being old enough to reach it. Will had a tattoo on his arm that said family. That tells us something. It tells us that whatever else was going on in his life, whatever currents of ordinary teenage turbulence he was navigating, he had made a choice to define himself by that word. He had chosen, permanently, to place that value at the center of his identity. Whether the tattoo was a declaration of gratitude for what he had, or a declaration of longing for what he wanted, is something only Will could have told us. And that is one of the many things we will never be able to ask him. The night of March 12, 2017 was a Sunday night. It was mid-March in western Kentucky, which means the temperature had begun to turn, still cold enough for a jacket, but with the particular promise of spring in the evening air. Henderson in mid-March smells like the river, like thawing soil, like the year restarting itself. The bridges still shine their lights across the Ohio. The town still carries the quiet that has always been its character. Somewhere in that quiet, on that Sunday night, Will Adams was seen for the last time. What happened in the specific hours before his disappearance, the details of where he was, and who he was with, and what was said, are not publicly confirmed. This is one of the painful realities of a case that received limited media attention and limited public documentation. The fine-grained details that true crime audiences have come to expect, the timelines, the phone records, the witness accounts, do not exist in the public record for this case. What exists is the before and the after, the boy and the absence, the Sunday night, and the Monday morning when the world began to understand that Will Adams was gone. He was reported missing. His name was entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NamUs, the federal database that tracks long-term missing persons across the country. The Henderson Police Department began what would become an investigation that has not, as of the time of this video, produced a resolution. There were no confirmed sightings in the days that followed. There were no confirmed leads that led anywhere. There was no clear answer to the question that his family has been living with for nearly a decade. Did Will walk away? Or did something take him? Those two questions pull in opposite directions, and they have pulled at everyone who has ever thought seriously about this case. The runaway theory offers a kind of consolation. If he walked away, at least he was alive when he left. If he walked away, there is the possibility, however thin, that somewhere in America a young man who is now 24 years old is living a life that nobody who loved him knows about. But the runaway theory carries its own weight of pain, because 8 years is a long time to be silent. 8 years is a long time to not pick up a phone, not send a message, not give any signal at all that the people who had his name tattooed on their hearts with the word family were not worth a word. The other theories, foul play, accident, the cold dark water of the Ohio, are harder to sit with. They don't offer the cold comfort of possibility. They offer only finality, and finality without proof is its own kind of torture. We will go through all of it. We will walk through what is known, and what can reasonably be examined, and what remains wrapped in the particular silence that has defined this case from the beginning. We will talk about the town, and the river, and the systems that were supposed to protect the 16-year-old boy, and didn't, or couldn't. We will talk about what it means for a family to live with a question that has no answer. But first, we need to understand the place. Because Henderson, Kentucky is not just a backdrop to this story. It is part of this story. The river is part of this story. The particular way that small towns absorb and then forget their own tragedies is part of this story. And to understand what happened to Will Adams, or what might have happened, you have to understand the world he moved through in the last days before he vanished. A 16-year-old with a tattoo that said family, gone without a trace, in a town where people don't just vanish. And yet, he did. The Ohio River doesn't look dangerous from the banks. That's the thing about it. Standing on the Henderson riverfront, looking north across the water toward Indiana, the river has a kind of gray, quiet majesty. It moves. You can see the current in the center of the channel, a long smooth pull that doesn't break or churn, but it doesn't announce its power. It doesn't roar. It simply moves. Wide, and cold, and completely indifferent. River people know better. The locals who grew up on these banks understand that the Ohio's surface beauty is a kind of deception. The currents underneath are unpredictable. The banks in certain stretches are steep and soft. A person who falls into the Ohio River at night, in March, in water that still carries the cold of winter, is in serious trouble very quickly. The river reclaims what falls into it, and it doesn't always give it back. This is not an accusation. It is a fact about the geography of Henderson, Kentucky, and it is one of the reasons the river has been part of every serious examination of what might have happened to Will Adams. Henderson sits at a bend in the river, which means the town and the water have always been intertwined. The bridges that cross it, the Henderson Twin Bridges, carrying the old US 41 connector between Kentucky and Indiana, are landmarks the way all bridges over wide rivers are landmarks. They mark the crossing point. They mark the division between here and somewhere else. And for a 16-year-old boy navigating the pressures of his life in the winter of 2017, that crossing point, the idea of somewhere else, of the other bank, of the world beyond the water, carries its own quiet weight. We don't know if Will Adams ever went near the river on the night of March 12, 2017. We don't know if the Ohio had anything to do with his disappearance at all. But we know that the river is there, and that it has been there in every version of this story, silent and present and patient, the way it always is. And on the morning of March 13th, Will Adams was gone. That is where this story begins. Henderson, Kentucky has a particular relationship with its own identity. It is the kind of place that knows exactly what it is and doesn't apologize for it. Population roughly 28,000, the seat of Henderson County, pressed up against the Ohio River on its northern edge and surrounded by the flat agricultural land of western Kentucky on every other side. It is not a city. It is not a village. It occupies that specific middle register of American geography, the small city, the large town, that defines life differently than either extreme. Drive into Henderson from the south on US 41, and you pass through the kind of American landscape that hasn't changed much in 40 years. Fast food chains and auto parts stores and churches, so many churches, because this is western Kentucky and faith is woven into the architecture of daily life the same way the river is woven into the geography. There are older neighborhoods where the houses are wide and settled into their lots with the confidence of age. There are newer subdivisions at the edges of town. There is a downtown district along North Main Street that has the slightly uncertain look of small American downtowns everywhere. Some businesses thriving, some storefronts empty, the whole thing managing a kind of dignified resilience. The town has produced its share of notable people over the years. There is a local pride to Henderson that is not boastful, but is real. It is the kind of pride that comes from endurance. From knowing that the floods have come and the river has risen and the jobs have come and gone, and the town is still here, still looking north across the Ohio toward Indiana, still carrying on. For a 16-year-old in 2017, Henderson would have felt both intimate and limiting in equal measure. Intimate because there are no strangers in a town of 28,000. You see the same faces at the same places, you know whose parents work where, you know the history of families going back generations. Limiting because that same familiarity makes it feel, at 16, like the world is already fully mapped. Like there are no discoveries left inside the perimeter of the bridges. This is not a criticism of Henderson. It is a description of the particular emotional experience of being a teenager in a small town, in any era, in any state. The restlessness is not unique to Henderson. It is the standard equipment of adolescence in America. What is unique to Henderson, what makes it the specific place that frames this story, is the river. The Ohio River at Henderson is something to experience rather than describe. It is wide enough that the Indiana shore looks distant on misty mornings. The water is brown with the sediment it carries from the mountains of Pennsylvania, past Pittsburgh, past Cincinnati, past the places where the river's tributaries pour in. By the time it reaches Henderson, the Ohio is a serious river. Not the narrow creek it is near its headwaters, but a major commercial waterway, industrial in scale, with barge traffic and bridge traffic and a current that has its own agenda entirely separate from the concerns of the people who live on its banks. The twin bridges span it at Henderson in two arches of concrete and steel that have been a fixture of this stretch of the river for decades. They carry the traffic back and forth between Kentucky and Indiana, between Henderson and Evansville across the water, in the daily rhythm of a river-crossing town. The bridges are visible from much of Henderson. They are part of the skyline in the way that bridges always become part of the mental landscape of towns that depend on them. And they are one of the features of Henderson's geography that becomes impossible to ignore when you think about the disappearance of a 16-year-old boy on a March night in 2017. The details of Will Adams' background that are publicly available are limited. What the documents in this case confirm is basic. He was 16 years old at the time of his disappearance, with brown hair and brown eyes, standing between 5'3" and 5'7", weighing approximately 140 pounds. He had a tattoo on his arm that read family. He was a resident of Henderson, Kentucky. What is not confirmed publicly, what is not in any accessible record or news report, are the specifics of his family structure, his school life, his friend group, his interests, his struggles. These details exist. They live in the memories of the people who knew him, in the files of the Henderson Police Department, in the hearts of his family members who have been waiting for answers for nearly a decade. But they are not in the public record, and this story will not fabricate them, because Will Adams was a real person, and his real story deserves more respect than that. What can be said? What can be said about any 16-year-old in a small river town in 2017 is that his world was shaped by the intersection of the intimate and the vast. Intimate, the known streets, the known faces, the known rhythms of Henderson. Vast, the internet, which in 2017 was fully woven into the lives of teenagers in ways that even the teenagers themselves didn't always fully understand. In 2017, a 16-year-old in Henderson, Kentucky had the same access to the global digital landscape as any teenager in New York or Los Angeles. The same social media platforms, the same messaging apps, the same ability to reach beyond the perimeter of the town in ways that would have been impossible for any generation before. This matters because it is part of the landscape of possibilities in this case. A teenager in 2017 had the ability to build relationships, real, emotionally significant relationships, with people they had never physically met. They could make plans. They could arrange meetings. They could, if they chose, simply walk away from the physical geography of their life and into a digital physical overlap that no one in their immediate world would know about until they were already gone. This is not an accusation against Will Adams. It is a description of the world he inhabited, a world that was larger, in important ways, than the town of 28,000 he lived in, and a world that poses questions this case has never fully answered. The tattoo. It keeps coming back to the tattoo. Family written on the skin of a 16-year-old boy, permanent as the river. People get tattoos for different reasons. Some get them out of impulse, for the aesthetic, for the story they want to tell the world. Some get them as declarations. This is what I am. This is what I stand for. This is what I choose. At 16, even in a state where a minor with parental permission can legally get tattooed, the decision has a particular weight. It is not a casual act. It is an act of commitment, of self-definition. Family. What did it mean to Will Adams, specifically? That question can't be answered from the outside. But it can be held. It can be considered. Because the word on his skin is the sharpest available evidence of what mattered to him, or what he wanted to matter to him, in the period before he disappeared. And the haunting quality of the tattoo is not just its content, but its permanence. That word is still out there somewhere. Either on the skin of a 24-year-old man who chose, for reasons no one understands, to disappear and stay gone, or on the skin of a body that has not yet been found. Neither possibility is comfortable. Neither possibility is comfortable, and yet one of them is true. And 8 years have passed without anyone being able to say with certainty which one. Henderson County's law enforcement, the Henderson Police Department, and the Kentucky State Police would have treated Will's disappearance as a missing persons case from the moment the report was filed. The standard protocols for a missing juvenile in 2017 would have included entering the case into the FBI's National Crime Information Center, the NCIC, which flags missing persons cases for law enforcement agencies across the country. The NamUs listing, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System listing that makes the case publicly searchable, confirms that Will's disappearance was officially documented at the federal level. What NamUs cannot confirm, and what the public record does not contain, is what the investigation produced in the days and weeks after Will disappeared. What leads were followed. What witnesses were interviewed? What the phone records showed, if phone records were obtained? What the search of Henderson's parks and riverbanks and rural outskirts produced? What the public record does confirm is the absence of resolution. 8 years, and no confirmed sighting. 8 years, and no arrest. 8 years, and Will Adams 3 remains listed as a missing person. That is itself a kind of answer, just not the one anyone wanted. In the small towns of America, when someone vanishes, the community closes around the wound the way a body closes around an injury, protective, reflexive, trying to contain the damage. People talk. Rumors circulate. Theories form in the space where facts refuse to exist. Someone knows something, or thinks they know something, or once heard something from someone who might have known something. The signal-to-noise ratio in those early weeks and months is difficult for investigators. Every lead has to be run down. Every rumor has to be assessed. Every person with a theory has to be listened to with the kind of patience that law enforcement rarely has the resources to sustain for long. And then, gradually, the intensity begins to drain. The news coverage, such as it was, and in Will's case, it was limited, primarily regional radio coverage from the Owensboro market, fades. The search parties end. The flyers on telephone poles weather and fade and fall. The case does not close, because missing persons cases rarely close officially. They just grow quieter. They settle into the background of a community's grief. 8 years is a long time to carry that weight. Will Adams was 16 when he disappeared. He would be 24 years old today. The gap between those two numbers contains everything. High school graduation, first jobs, first loves, first adult choices, first real brushes with the full complexity of the world. Everything that happens between 16 and 24, all of it happened without him in the presence of the people who loved him. Or it didn't happen at all. That is the question that sits at the center of this story, and it has been sitting there, unanswered, since the morning of March 13, 2017, when the world noticed Will Adams was gone. And it is time to go back to that night. There is a particular quality to the days that precede an unexplained disappearance. When you look back at them from the far side of what happened, the ordinary events of those days take on a distorted weight. A Saturday afternoon becomes the last Saturday. A phone call becomes the last phone call. A meal eaten, a joke told, a door closed behind someone. All of it accumulates a significance it never had when it was being lived, because the person living it had no idea those were the final hours in which they would be present and accounted for in the world. Will Adams, in the days leading up to March 12, 2017, was living in Henderson, Kentucky. He was going through whatever the ordinary rhythm of his days was. School days, presumably, since this was a Sunday night when he disappeared. He had been in school for most of the preceding week. The Henderson County school system, serving a community of 28,000, would have been the frame of his weekday life. Classes, hallways, the particular social ecosystem of a small-town high school, where everyone has known everyone since elementary school, and the hierarchies are both rigid and intimate. Weekends in Henderson for a teenager in 2017 would have had a specific texture. Without the density of a city, without the endless entertainment options of a metropolitan area, the social life of a small-town teen tends to organize itself around a small number of locations and a large number of hours. The phone, friends' houses, whatever gathering points the town offers for young people. The particular stretches of road that teenagers drive when there is nowhere specific to go but nowhere to be is unacceptable. The Ohio River is always present, not as a destination, necessarily, but as a presence, a geographical fact that shapes the town's relationship with itself. You can walk to the riverfront from many parts of Henderson. The levee trail that runs along the bank offers a path between the water and the town proper. On a March night with the temperature beginning to climb back toward tolerable, the river would have been accessible. Present. Part of the town's geography in a way that would have been unremarkable and normal. None of what is being described here has been confirmed as directly relevant to Will Adams' disappearance. It is context. It is the shape of the world he inhabited. What is confirmed is the before and the after. Before, Will Adams is a 16-year-old in Henderson, Kentucky, living whatever version of a small-town teenage life was his. After, on the morning of March 13, 2017, it became clear that Will Adams was not where he was supposed to be. The transition between those two states, the moment of the before becoming the after, is precisely what is missing from the public record. And that gap, that silence at the center of the story, is both the most important and the most frustrating element of this case. What can be known about the circumstances of Will's disappearance comes primarily from the public-facing elements of the missing persons report and the NamUs listing. He was last seen on March 12, 2017, a Sunday. He was 16 years old. He was in Henderson, Kentucky. Beyond that, the specific circumstances of his last known location, the identity of the last person who saw him, the nature of the last interactions he had before he vanished, none of that is in the public record. This is actually more common than people realize. Missing persons cases, particularly those involving teenagers, often have significant gaps in what is publicly available. Investigations protect sensitive information. Families choose, understandably, what they share publicly and what they hold close. In cases that receive limited media coverage, and Will's case received very limited media coverage beyond the Owensboro radio mention that is cited in the original documents, there is simply less public documentation than in high-profile cases. The result is a silence that surrounds this case the way the river surrounds Henderson's northern edge. Present, heavy, unfathomable from the outside. There is something to be said here about the nature of attention, about who receives it and who doesn't. In 2017, the mechanisms of media attention around missing persons were not significantly more equitable than they are today. Young white women and girls received the most coverage. The phenomenon had a name, missing white woman syndrome, and it had documented effects on which cases received sustained public attention, which received investigative resources, which stayed in the news cycle long enough to generate tips and leads. Will Adams was a 16-year-old boy. His case received coverage from one regional radio outlet that has been cited publicly. It received an entry in NamUs. And then, by most measures of public attention, it went quiet. This is not a condemnation of any specific individual or institution. It is a systemic observation about the way that attention and resources flow in missing persons cases in America. The cases that receive the most attention tend to generate the most tips, the most investigative pressure, the most resources devoted to resolution. The cases that receive limited attention tend to become cold cases, not because the investigators stop caring, but because the bandwidth of small departments is limited, because tips dry up when coverage ends, because the weight of ongoing caseloads presses down on even the most dedicated investigators. Will's case has been open for 8 years. That is a measure of both the commitment of the investigators who have not officially closed it and the absence of evidence that would allow it to be closed. In the days after March 13, 2017, when the disappearance was reported and the early search began, Henderson would have felt the particular strain that comes to small towns when one of their own is missing. The community would have been aware. People who knew Will, people who knew his family, people who had seen him in the days before, all of them would have been turning over their memories, looking for the detail that didn't fit, the conversation that in retrospect seemed strange, the last moment they saw him, and what he had been doing, and whether there had been anything that should have registered as a warning. In small towns, that kind of communal memory sifting happens alongside the official investigation, not separate from it. It happens at church, in the grocery store, on Facebook. People share what they remember. People share what they think they remember, which is not always the same thing. People share rumors. The signal gets noisy very quickly. What none of that noise produced, not in the first days, not in the weeks and months that followed, was an answer. No one came forward with a confirmed sighting of Will after March 12th. No physical evidence was publicly reported as having been found. No one was named as a suspect or a person of interest in the investigation, at least not in any public statement from Henderson law enforcement that has been documented. The case entered the long, slow suspension of unresolved missing persons cases. Still open, still unanswered, still carrying the weight of a family waiting. There is a word that psychologists use for what Will's family has been experiencing since March 2017, ambiguous loss. It is a term coined by the family therapist Dr. Pauline Boss to describe a specific kind of grief, the grief that comes not from confirmed death but from unresolved absence. When someone is gone but not confirmed dead, the normal processes of grief cannot proceed normally. There is no funeral. There is no grave. There is no defined moment at which the bereaved can begin to process the loss. Instead, There is an ongoing suspension between hope and despair. The hope that the missing person is alive, somewhere, and the despair of not knowing, of never knowing. Ambiguous loss is considered by mental health professionals to be one of the most difficult forms of grief to process. It has no natural endpoint. It does not follow the stages. It circles back on itself repeatedly, because hope keeps reopening the wound that despair begins to close. For families living with ambiguous loss, every March 12th is an anniversary of absence, not of death. Every birthday passed without contact is both a grief and a question. Every year adds to the weight, and the weight adds to the silence, and the silence fills in the space where the person used to be until that space feels like its own permanent geography. Will Adams would have turned 17 in 2017, the year he disappeared. He would have turned 18, 19, 20. He would have been old enough to vote, old enough to serve in the military. He would have had a 21st birthday, a 22nd, a 23rd. He would be 24 years old today, by the calendar. The tattoo on his arm would still say family. If he is alive, that tattoo exists on the skin of a 24-year-old man somewhere in the world, carrying the permanent declaration he made at 16. If he is not alive, if whatever happened on the night of March 12, 2017 was the last thing that happened to him, then that tattoo is still out there somewhere, waiting to be found. Neither image is easy to hold. And yet, that's where we are. 8 years. No answers. One word. Family. Let's walk through March 12, 2017, the way you walk through a house after a storm. Carefully, looking at everything, aware that something has changed but not yet sure what. It was a Sunday. Sunday in Henderson, Kentucky has a specific rhythm. The churches fill in the morning, and there are more churches per capita in western Kentucky than most people outside the region would guess. Not in a performative way, but in the way that faith is genuinely woven into the social fabric of the Ohio River communities. Sunday mornings, the town goes quiet in the particular way of Sundays, and then gradually fills back in through the afternoon. The restaurant parking lots fill. Families gather. The slow ease of the last day of the weekend settles over the streets. For teenagers, Sunday has its own quality. The weekend is ending. Monday, school, is approaching. There is a specific kind of restlessness in Sunday afternoons for teenagers who don't want the weekend to be over, who want to extend the time before the week reasserts its demands. They text. They gather wherever teenagers gather. They are trying to hold something open that is already closing. Will Adams was 16 years old on this Sunday. Whatever his afternoon looked like, wherever he was, whoever he was with, whatever he was thinking, it was the last ordinary day of a life that had been, by every measure available, still unfolding, still accumulating, still full of time that he did not yet know was running out. The specifics of his movements on March 12, 2017, are not publicly documented. This is one of the defining frustrations of this case. The confirmed fact is only this. He was last seen on this date. The last confirmed contact the public record acknowledges is March 12. What happened in the hours between the last time someone saw him and the moment the world noticed he was gone is the question at the center of everything. We do not know if he was where he was supposed to be during the day on March 12. We do not know if he was in communication with anyone, by phone, by message, in the hours before he vanished. We do not know if there was any argument, any conflict, any moment of emotional disruption that preceded his disappearance. We do not know if he left the place he was staying voluntarily, under some kind of distress, or if something else entirely was happening. We know that he was there, and then he wasn't. In missing persons investigations, the first 48 hours are considered critical. Law enforcement everywhere knows this. It is the founding principle of missing persons response protocols. The longer the gap between the disappearance and the beginning of an active search, the colder the trail. Evidence degrades. Witnesses' memories shift. The person, if they are moving under their own power, has more time and more distance. When Will was reported missing, the Henderson Police Department would have initiated a search. The NamUs listing, the NCC entry, the standard protocols of juvenile missing persons cases in Kentucky, all of these would have been activated. Whether an Amber Alert was issued is not documented in the public record. Amber Alerts have specific criteria. The disappearance must be believed to involve an abduction by specific criteria. There must be sufficient descriptive information. there must be reason to believe the child is in imminent danger. Not all missing juvenile cases meet these criteria, and the decision involves assessment that is specific to the circumstances of each case. What the public record confirms is that the Henderson Police Department recognized Will as a missing person and filed the appropriate reports. The case was entered into national systems. The case has remained open for 8 years. In the days immediately following the disappearance, any serious investigation would have focused on the geography of Henderson. The town is not large. The areas a 16-year-old might have access to on a Sunday night are somewhat limited. Homes, friends' houses, the downtown strip, the riverfront, the parks, the routes between these places. The Ohio River would have demanded attention, not because anyone was asserting that Will went into the river, but because it is there, and it is lethal, and in any investigation of a disappearance in a river town, the water is always part of the search. River searches are notoriously difficult. The Ohio River at Henderson has currents that are strong enough and variable enough that a body entering the water is not guaranteed to surface where or when a search might expect it. There are bends in the river, sandbars, the varying depths of the channel, the flow patterns that shift with the seasons. River searches require specialized resources, dive teams, sonar equipment, coordination with the Army Corps of Engineers, which maintains the navigation channel. Small departments typically do not have these resources internally and must request assistance. Whether a river search was conducted as part of the investigation into Will's disappearance is not publicly documented. The documents produced in connection with this case mention it as an investigative avenue, not as a confirmed finding. This is an important distinction. The search would also have included canvassing, talking to the people Will knew, going door to door in the neighborhoods he frequented, asking the questions that missing persons investigations always ask. When did you last see him? What was he wearing? Did he say anything unusual? Was he upset? Did he have any plans? Was he meeting anyone? And somewhere in those canvasses, somewhere in those early interviews, people may have said things that formed the first tentative shape of a theory. But theories without evidence are still just theories, and the public record has not produced any confirmed investigative conclusions about what happened to Will Adams. There is something telling about the absence of a suspect. 8 years later, no one has been named publicly as a person of interest in the case. This absence can be read in multiple ways. It might mean that the investigation produced no credible evidence pointing to foul play, supporting, in a cold way, the runaway theory. It might mean that the investigation did identify persons of interest but lacked sufficient evidence to make any public statement. It might mean that the investigation was limited by resources and the full picture was never assembled. What the absence does not mean is that the investigation is closed or that the question has been resolved. In the weeks following Will's disappearance, local media coverage documented the case in limited ways. The Owensboro radio reference in the original documents suggests at least some regional media attention in the immediate aftermath. But media attention in small market regional news is a finite resource. A missing teen in Henderson, Kentucky is not a story that the Louisville stations will cover extensively, not without specific developments. The national media machine, the cable news apparatus that can amplify a case to the point of generating thousands of tips per day, never engaged with this case in any documented way. That absence of media amplification had consequences. Tips dry up when the coverage stops. The community's engaged attention, the specific kind of collective alertness that active media coverage produces, has a limited lifespan. 3 weeks after a disappearance, the town that was alert and searching has begun to absorb the absence as a fact. Not because people don't care, but because life requires attention and attention has to be distributed. The cruel mathematics of public memory works against cases like this one. For Will's family, March 12th never stopped being present. For the Henderson community, it gradually receded. For the investigators, it became one of however many open cases their department was managing. For the national public, who never really knew his name, it never registered at all. This is how cases go cold. Not with a decision, not with a formal end, but with the slow redistribution of attention away from a question that refuses to answer itself. Will Adams was last seen on March 12, 2017. He has not been confirmed located since. And the question, the evidence left behind, the absence, the unanswered search, the tattoo on a missing boy's arm. is still asking to be answered. Now let's look at what that answer might be. Every disappearance generates theories. It's human nature. We are pattern-seeking creatures, and when a pattern is broken as violently as a person simply ceasing to exist, we cannot help trying to restore the logic. We look for the explanation that makes the absence make sense. We construct narratives out of the fragments we have. We hold them up against what we know, and we try to see if they fit. For Will Adams, 3 primary theories have existed since the early days of the investigation. They are the theories that anyone thinking seriously about this case must eventually confront. And they are important to examine not because any of them has been proven, but because each one illuminates a different dimension of a case that has no confirmed resolution. The first theory is the one that is both the most comforting and, in a specific way, the most painful. The runaway theory. Teenagers run away from home. This is a statistical fact of American life. According to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, approximately 400,000 youth experience running away each year in the United States. Most are found within a short period of time. Some take longer. A smaller number remain unlocated for extended periods, and within that group, the reasons for the extended absence are as varied as the teenagers themselves. In Will's case, the runaway theory has a surface plausibility. He was 16, at an age where the tensions between teenage self-determination and parental authority can reach their most acute point. He lived in a small town where the pressures of familiarity could, for the wrong kid in the wrong moment, feel suffocating. He had access, via the internet, to the kind of connections that might have made an escape plan feel not just possible, but actual. He had, perhaps, reasons, private reasons that we don't have access to publicly, that made leaving seem like the answer. But the runaway theory runs immediately into a wall that, after 8 years, it cannot scale. And that wall is the silence. When teenagers run away, even those who intend to run away and stay gone, they typically maintain some form of contact. Not with parents, necessarily. Not in ways that would allow them to be found. But with someone. A friend. A person they trust. A digital breadcrumb, however small. The complete and total silence that has attended Will Adams' absence for 8 years. No confirmed sightings, no confirmed contact, no social media activity attributable to him, no financial trail in the public record, is unusual even within the category of long-term runaway cases. 8 years is an extraordinary length of time to maintain total silence if you are a person who is alive and free and choosing not to be found. People slip. People reach out. People miss the people they left. And even if they don't, even if the determination to remain disappeared is absolute, the modern world generates digital noise around people who are moving through it. Transactions, phone signals, social media identities. The contemporary infrastructure of daily life is not easily navigated in total anonymity, especially not starting at age 16. The absence of this noise, the complete lack of any confirmed trace of Will Adams in the 8 years since his disappearance, does not prove he is dead. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. But it does create a significant problem for the runaway theory. At some point, the question becomes not why did he run away, but why has there been no trace of him since? And that question doesn't have an easy answer. The second theory is foul play. This is the theory that family members of missing persons often arrive at when the initial search produces nothing and the silence extends past its plausible limits. It is the theory that investigators never fully set aside in any case involving a missing juvenile. Foul play in a small town takes a different shape than it does in a city. In a city, a stranger can enter a life, disrupt it, and disappear back into the anonymity of urban density. In a small town like Henderson, the universe of people who intersected with Will Adams' life is relatively small. Everyone knew everyone. The connections between people in Henderson were visible in a way that connections in a city are not. If someone harmed Will Adams on the night of March 12, 2017, that someone would, almost necessarily, be someone who was known to Will, someone he trusted enough to be with, or someone who had access to him in the specific geography of Henderson on that specific night. The world of small-town foul play is an intimate world. That intimacy can be an investigative asset. The pool of potential suspects is smaller. But it can also be an investigative liability, because in close-knit communities, The same social connections that make people visible also make witnesses reluctant to come forward against people they know. The foul play theory is supported by the same evidence that complicates the runaway theory, the silence. If someone harmed Will Adams, the absence of his body, the absence of physical evidence that has reached the public record, suggests either that his remains are in a location that has not yet been discovered, or that the circumstances of what happened to him have not yet come to light. The Ohio River is large. The terrain around Henderson, the rural areas, the agricultural land, the stretches of woodland that exist in and around Henderson County, is substantial. A body concealed in the right location in that geography could plausibly remain undetected for years. This is not a pleasant thought, but it is a realistic one, and realistic thinking is what this case demands. The third theory is accident, specifically, the possibility that Will encountered some form of environmental hazard on the night of March 12th, and that his death, if it occurred, was unintended and unwitnessed. The Ohio River is the most prominent version of this theory. March in western Kentucky, as previously noted, still carries winter water temperatures and strong currents. A young person who fell into the Ohio River at night, in those conditions, would have faced extremely low survival odds. And the river, as established, does not always give back what it takes. The accident theory has the advantage of explaining the disappearance without requiring either ongoing determination to hide, as the runaway theory requires, or the presence of a culpable second party, as the foul play theory requires. It is, in a sense, the theory that requires the fewest additional moving parts. A teenager, a night, a riverbank, a tragedy that nobody witnessed. But the accident theory is not fully satisfying either. It doesn't explain the failure to find remains. River accidents in documented cases do eventually produce physical evidence in most instances. The Ohio River, despite its capacity to carry and conceal, is not an unlimited repository. Cases of individuals who fell into major rivers in this region have, in the majority of documented instances, resulted in the eventual discovery of remains or other physical evidence. The absence of that evidence, after 8 years, creates questions that the accident theory doesn't fully answer. All three theories, examined carefully, explain something about Will's disappearance while failing to explain everything. They each leave a residue of unaccounted facts, an edge that doesn't quite line up with the other edges. This is the nature of cases without resolution. The theories are, by definition, incomplete, because if any one of them were complete, the case would have been resolved. What sits underneath all three theories, supporting them all and resolving none of them, is the question of what Will Adams was doing in the hours before he vanished. Who he was with, where he went, what the last conversation he had actually said. Those answers are out there. They exist in someone's memory, or in some form of record, or in some piece of physical evidence that has not yet been connected to this case. They have to be. Disappearances don't generate from nothing. Something happened on March 12, 2017, in Henderson, Kentucky. Something was set in motion, by Will's own choice, or by someone else's action, or by the indifferent force of environmental circumstance. Something happened, and then Will Adams was gone, and the world he left behind has been trying to understand the shape of that something ever since. The silence from law enforcement, no publicly named suspects, no publicly disclosed investigative leads, does not mean the investigation has produced nothing. It means that whatever the investigation has produced has not yet been enough to bring to a public conclusion. In ongoing investigations, silence is standard operating procedure, not an indication of failure. But the silence from the case itself, from the world, from any trace of Will Adams in the 8 years since his disappearance, that silence is harder to account for. That silence is the thing that sits in the chest when you think about this case long enough. The absence of noise. The absence of the ordinary friction of a person moving through the world. It can mean he is hiding. It can mean he is dead. It can mean something else entirely that no one has yet imagined. And the not knowing. That is the defining feature of this case. Not the theories. Not the investigation. The not knowing. The open question. The silence that has been sitting on top of March 12, 2017, in Henderson, Kentucky, for 8 years. Someone out there has a piece of this puzzle. Someone always does. There is a particular injustice in the way that some missing persons cases are remembered, and some are forgotten, that this story cannot honestly be told without addressing. By the time Will Adams disappeared in March of 2017, America had developed a sophisticated and deeply unequal apparatus for responding to missing persons. The Amber Alert system, created in 1996, was by that point a fixture of American life. Those emergency broadcasts that interrupt the radio and buzz the cell phone and put the license plate of a suspected abductor on highway message boards. But Amber Alerts have criteria, and those criteria are specific, and not every missing child case meets them. The criteria require a law enforcement belief that an abduction has occurred, that the child is in danger, and that sufficient descriptive information is available to make a public alert useful. Missing teenager cases, cases where a young person has left without clear evidence of abduction, often don't meet the threshold. Will Adams' case does not appear in the public record as having generated an Amber Alert. This may reflect the circumstances of his disappearance, the absence of specific evidence pointing to abduction in the early hours of the search. It may reflect resource limitations. It may reflect the particular way that his case was categorized in those first critical hours. Whatever the reason, the result was that the amplification provided by a major public alert did not occur. And without that amplification, the case moved into the quieter channels of missing persons response, the NCC entry, the NamUs listing, the regional media coverage from Owensboro Radio, while the national attention mechanisms that generate tips and leads and public pressure never activated. This is not an anomaly. It is a pattern. The pattern is this. In America, some missing people are searched for publicly with enormous intensity, and others are searched for quietly, with limited resources, in a landscape that doesn't fully register their absence. The factors that determine which category a person falls into include race, gender, age, and geography. They include media market, whether local TV stations decide to cover a case, and how prominently. They include social capital, whether the missing person's family has the connections and resources to push for sustained public attention. They include the particular timing of the disappearance relative to whatever else is competing for public attention at that moment. Will Adams was a 16-year-old boy in a small city in western Kentucky. His case was reported in a regional radio market. He has been listed in NamUs for 8 years. He has not been the subject of a 2020 episode or a true crime podcast series or a dedicated subreddit with thousands of members crowdsourcing leads. This is not because his disappearance matters less. It is because the mechanisms of attention are not distributed equitably, and cases like his, real, unresolved, urgent to the people who love him, fall through the spaces in the net. The consequence of this inequality is measurable. High-profile cases generate tips. Thousands of tips, often. Some of those tips are useless. Many are well-meaning, but based on faulty information. But some tips, in the documented history of high-profile missing persons cases, have been the pivotal piece of information that moved an investigation forward. A neighbor who recognized a photo. A former coworker who remembered something. Someone who saw something and didn't know it was significant until they saw the story on television. Low-profile cases don't get those tips, or they get far fewer of them, because the people who might have the crucial piece of information never see the story, never hear the name, never connect what they remember to the person the investigators are looking for. This is the systemic failure that sits underneath a case like Will's. Not individual negligence, not a detective who didn't care, not a department that decided a missing teen wasn't worth their time, but a system that distributes attention in patterns that leave some cases in the light and others in the shadow. Henderson County is served by a police department that has to manage all of Henderson's law enforcement needs with the budget and staffing of a small city department. The Henderson Police Department, like every small city department in America, operates with finite resources and an infinite caseload. Missing persons investigations compete for investigative time with everything else that happens in a city of 28,000. Property crimes, domestic incidents, drug enforcement, traffic fatalities. The detective who caught Will Adams' case didn't have only Will Adams' case. They had a desk full of cases, all of them real, all of them pressing. This doesn't excuse inadequate investigation, but it contextualizes it. The resource gap between what a small city department can devote to a missing person's case and what a high-profile case can draw from FBI involvement, state police support, and private investigative resources is staggering. And that gap closes on the cold cases of small towns with quiet, devastating efficiency. There is something else worth addressing in the landscape of this case. The particular challenge of investigating a disappearance in a community where social networks are dense and loyalty runs deep. In small towns, the people who might have information are also the people who know and love and depend on each other. They are the same people. A witness who saw something that might be relevant may also be the cousin of someone they believe was involved, or the neighbor of the family, or the person whose kid goes to school with the victim's siblings. In cities, witnesses are often strangers to the people they're witnessing. In small towns, everyone is connected to everyone else, and that connectivity creates a kind of gravitational pull towards silence. Not always, not inevitably, but with a frequency that investigators in small-town cases recognize and have to account for. The psychological literature on this phenomenon is substantial. Witnesses in small-town cases are more likely to minimize what they saw, to rationalize not coming forward, to convince themselves that what they remember isn't important enough to disrupt the social fabric for. And the longer time passes without an official resolution, the more that rationalization calcifies. What was fresh and vivid in memory in the days after the disappearance becomes, years later, uncertain. Details shift. The confidence that would have supported a tip or a witness statement erodes. 8 years is a long time. There are people in Henderson, Kentucky who knew Will Adams. People who went to school with him, who lived near him, who had some relationship with his life in the days before he vanished. Some of them have been interviewed by investigators. Some of them have volunteered information. Some of them, over the 8 years since March 2017, have perhaps remembered things they didn't remember in the immediate aftermath. And some of them, it is statistically almost certain, in a case like this, know something that they have never told anyone. This is not an accusation of anyone specifically. It is a statement about the nature of how information moves in missing persons cases and how long it can remain static. In documented cases across the history of cold case investigations, it is extremely common for a crucial piece of information to have been present in the community for years, decades, in some cases, before it finally surfaces. The person who knew something finally tells someone. The guilt, or the changed circumstance, or the distance of time that makes the revelation feel less threatening, eventually creates the conditions for the information to move. That is why cases like Will's are never truly cold. They are dormant. The information exists. The person who needs to share it exists. The timing is the variable that nobody can control. This is also why efforts to keep cases like Will's in public awareness matter. Every video, every podcast, every social media post that puts his name and his face back in front of the public is another chance for the person who knows something to see it. Another chance for the calcified silence to develop a crack. Someone knows what happened on the night of March 12, 2017, in Henderson, Kentucky. That is not a rhetorical claim. It is a probabilistic near certainty, based on the simple logic of what disappearances are. Will Adams did not cease to exist. He either chose to leave, in which case he knows what happened, or someone was with him when he left, in which case that person knows, or someone was present for whatever happened to him, in which case that person knows. The information exists. It is held by a specific person or people in a specific set of memories. Every day that passes without that information surfacing is another day that Will Adams' family does not know. Every day that passes is another day that whatever happened on March 12th remains officially unresolved. Every day is a choice, by whoever holds that information, to keep holding it. And this is the moment to say clearly, if you know something, if you know anything about what happened to Will Adams, there are channels available to you. The Henderson Police Department, the Kentucky State Police, the national tip lines. You can report anonymously. You do not have to attach your name to what you know. But the information you carry, if you carry it, is not serving anyone in the silence. It is only serving the silence. Will Adams was 16 years old. He had family written on his arm. Somebody owes him the truth. 8 years. Sit with that number for a moment. 8 years. Not 8 months, which would already feel like an eternity for a family waiting for a missing person. 8 years. The length of time it takes for an elementary school student to graduate high school. The length of 2 presidential terms. The length of 8 January to December cycles of birthdays not celebrated, holidays not shared, ordinary Tuesdays not filled with the ordinary weight of a person being present in the world. For the people who loved Will Adams, his family, whoever his closest friends were in Henderson in 2017, the people who carry the specific texture of knowing him as a person rather than a name in a database, these 8 years have had a quality that is difficult to describe to anyone who hasn't lived through something similar. Dr. Pauline Boss, the researcher who coined the term ambiguous loss, spent decades studying what happens to families in exactly this situation. Families of soldiers missing in action. Families of people with Alzheimer's disease who are physically present but cognitively absent. Families of missing persons. Her finding, arrived at through decades of research and clinical work, is that ambiguous loss is uniquely and specifically destructive to the psychological health of those who experience it, more so, in many documented ways, than even confirmed death. The reason is this: grief, for all its pain, is a process. It has movement. It has stages, however nonlinear those stages might be. It moves towards something, not recovery, exactly, but a kind of accommodation. A new normal that includes the loss. Confirmed death, as devastating as it is, allows the people left behind to eventually build that new normal around the confirmed fact of the absence. Ambiguous loss denies that movement. It keeps the bereaved suspended between two states. The person is gone, but not confirmed gone. Dead, perhaps, but not proven. Alive, possibly, but completely silent. In this suspension, grief cannot complete its natural arc. The wound cannot close because the question that caused it remains open. Every new day is both another day of absence and another day of not knowing. The wound is kept open, by the open question, indefinitely. Families in this situation frequently describe a particular kind of psychological exhaustion, not from grief, exactly, but from the relentless effort of not knowing. The effort of having to choose, every day, what to believe. Whether to hold on to hope or begin to accept what the silence may be saying. Whether today will be the day something changes, or just another day of the same. Some families in this situation develop what clinicians describe as frozen grief, the inability to move forward in life decisions that feel like they require the resolution of the question. Remodeling a bedroom that might still be needed. Moving to a new city when someone might come home. Investing fully in new relationships when part of the self is still held in suspension by the unresolved past. This is not weakness. It is the logical emotional response to an impossible situation. Will Adams' family has been living this for 8 years. 8 Marches have come and gone. 8 times the date of March 12th has arrived on the calendar and passed without resolution. 8 winters have turned to springs, the way they always do on the Ohio River. The ice going out of the smaller streams, the river itself darkening and swelling, the land coming back to life the way land does regardless of what the people on it are carrying. The town of Henderson has moved forward, the way towns always do. New businesses have opened, and others have closed. The high school class that Will would have graduated with has been in the working world for years now. The people who knew him have continued to age, to change, to build lives that incorporate his absence as a fact they carry rather than a crisis they're managing. This is not callousness. It is the ordinary motion of time doing what time does. But for his family, time has not done that. Or not in the same way. For them, the question has remained immediate even as everything else has moved forward. The investigation remains open. The NamUs entry is still there, still public, still asking anyone who knows anything to come forward. Still carrying his description: brown hair, brown eyes, 5 feet 3 inches to 5 feet 7 inches, 140 pounds, tattoo reading family on his arm. There is a particular cruelty in that tattoo in the context of everything that has followed. He chose the word family permanently, made it part of his body, declared it the thing that mattered most to him at 16. And then he vanished, leaving his family with nothing but the echo of that word. The declaration he made about what he valued, with no explanation of why he left them or where he went or what happened. The tattoo is either a measure of how much he valued the people he lost, if he ran, or a measure of what was taken from him, if he didn't choose to go. Either way, it sits in the story like a weight that doesn't move. There are families in America who have been in this situation, suspended in the ambiguity of a missing loved one, for decades. Some of them have watched the investigation into their family member's disappearance go completely cold. Some have hired private investigators. Some have turned to advocacy, working to bring attention to their cases and to the broader systemic issues that allow missing persons cases in small towns and minority communities to languish without resolution. What all of them share? What connects every family living with the unresolved disappearance of a loved one is the understanding that the question is not theoretical. It is not a puzzle for the public to engage with intellectually. It is the organizing fact of their lives, the thing around which everything else has to be arranged. Will Adams' case is still officially open. That means someone, somewhere in the Henderson area law enforcement community, is still nominally responsible for this case. Still has it in a file. Still, ideally, will receive any new information that comes in with the attention it deserves. This is important because new information is always possible. Cases that have been cold for much longer than 8 years have broken open in the face of new information. DNA technology has transformed the landscape of cold cases in the last decade. Evidence that would have been scientifically uninformative in 2017 can be analyzed with dramatically greater precision today. Witness situations change. People who were afraid to come forward in 2017, who felt protected by their social connections or their own culpability, may find themselves in different circumstances now. Someone who was 25 in 2017 is 33 today. People's lives change. Their loyalties change. Their tolerance for carrying secrets changes. The tip that breaks this case could come from anywhere, and it could come at any time. In February 2024, investigators in California solved a murder case using forensic genealogy, analyzing DNA evidence through public genealogy databases to identify a suspect whose DNA was on record nowhere in the criminal justice system. Cold cases that were considered permanently unsolvable are being reopened and resolved with regularity now, because the tools available to investigators have advanced dramatically. The technology that was science fiction in 2017 is standard practice in 2025. Will Adams' case may benefit from these advances. Whether there is physical evidence to analyze, whether the investigation produced anything that could be submitted to new forensic methods, is not publicly known. But the general expansion of investigative tools is a genuine reason to maintain hope that cases like this one are not necessarily permanent mysteries. The question of what happened to Will Adams is not permanently closed by the weight of 8 years of silence. Silence is not a permanent state. It has been broken before, in cases just like this one. It will be broken again. The question is when. And the question of when, more than anything else, is the question this case puts to the people who have information. Every day they hold it is a day Will's family doesn't know. Every day the silence continues is a day the question remains open. Will Adams was 16 years old. He was 5 feet 3 inches to 5 feet 7 inches, brown hair, brown eyes, 140 pounds. He had a tattoo on his arm that read family. He disappeared from Henderson, Kentucky on March 12, 2017. He would be 24 years old today. And the silence since that night, the 8 years of no confirmed sightings, no confirmed contact, no confirmed trace of a life being lived somewhere in this world, is asking to be answered. There is a house somewhere in Henderson, Kentucky, where people have been waking up every morning for 8 years and living with the weight of a question that has no answer. Every morning since March 13, 2017, someone who loves Will Adams has opened their eyes to a world in which he is still listed as missing, still officially unaccounted for, still somewhere between the last time they saw him and the unknown. That is not a metaphor. That is the literal, physical, daily reality of a family in ambiguous loss. The bed he slept in is still somewhere in that town, presumably. The walls of a room he once occupied still stand. His birthday still comes around every year, marking another year that has passed without him. 8 of them now. We say the word closure a lot in true crime, as though it is a destination that can be reached if only enough information is gathered and enough questions are answered. But the people who have actually experienced the resolution of long-term missing persons cases will tell you that closure is more complicated than a word. Finding the answer, even the hardest answer, does not erase the years of not knowing. It does not give back the time. It does not unlive the 8 springs that have come and gone on the banks of the Ohio River since Will Adams disappeared. What it gives, those families say, is the ability to grieve fully, to take the wound that ambiguous loss kept open and begin to tend to it. Not to heal it completely. These wounds do not heal completely, but to stop bleeding. To know, Finally, what you are mourning. To be able to say this happened rather than we don't know what happened. To stop holding the open question and be given, instead, an answer. Well, Adam's family deserves that. They have deserved it since March 13th, 2017. Age progression technology, the kind of facial imaging that takes a person's last known photographs and extrapolates forward to estimate what they might look like years later, is used by organizations like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in long-term missing persons cases. It is not a perfect science, but it is a way of keeping a face present in the public consciousness, of making it possible for someone who might recognize a 24-year-old man in their daily life to connect that recognition back to a missing person file. Will Adams at 24 would look different from Will Adams at 16. The face would have completed its adult development. The jaw would have squared. The features would have settled. 8 years of time would have done what time does, changed him, in all the ways that a person changes between 16 and 24. But the brown eyes would still be brown. The tattoo on his arm would still say family. These things don't change. If Will Adams is alive somewhere, he is carrying that tattoo on his arm every day. He is 24 years old. He knows his own name and his own history. He knows that somewhere in Henderson, Kentucky, the people who loved him have been waiting. If that is the situation, if Will is alive and reading this somewhere, or if someone watching this knows him and where he is, the message is simple. It has always been simple. The people who love him want to know he is okay. He does not have to come back. He does not have to explain anything. He just has to let someone know he is alive. That is all. That is everything. If Will Adams is not alive, if what happened on March 12, 2017 was something he did not survive, then the message is different, but no less simple. It is addressed to whoever knows what happened, whoever was present, whoever has been carrying the knowledge of that night for 8 years in silence, under whatever weight that knowledge carries. Silence is heavy. 8 years of it is an extraordinary weight to carry. And the people who carry it, the people who know something they haven't said, know, on some level, that the weight belongs to someone else, that it was put on them by a choice, not by circumstance, that they could, if they chose, set it down. The channels are available. The Henderson Police Department, the Kentucky State Police, NamUs, which has a tip submission process, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children hotline at 1-800-THE-LOST. Any of these, all of these, anonymously, if needed. The tips don't require a name. They just require the information. Someone knows something. Statistically, logically, given what disappearances are and how they happen, someone knows something. Whether it is a small detail that seems irrelevant, or a major piece of information that the person carrying it knows is relevant, or something in between, it exists. It is out there. It is sitting in the memory of someone who knew Henderson, Kentucky in 2017, who knew Will Adams, who saw something, or heard something, or knows something that they have not yet connected to the investigation. This is not a movie. This is not a fictional true crime narrative designed to be satisfying by the time the credits roll. This is a real case, involving a real person, about a real family that has been waiting for 8 real years. The satisfaction of a resolved ending is not something this video can provide, because this story isn't over. The resolution exists. It is somewhere in the world, held by whoever holds it, but it hasn't happened yet. What can happen is awareness. What can happen is that someone watching this video, someone in Henderson or near Henderson, someone who had a connection to Will Adams' world in 2017, someone who has always meant to say something but never quite did, hears his name tonight and makes a different choice. A small choice. A phone call, or a submitted tip, or a conversation with someone they trust who knows someone in law enforcement. Cases break for smaller reasons than that, every day. So, Will Adams 3. Brown hair. Brown eyes. 5 feet 3 to 5 feet 7. 140 pounds. Family written in ink on his arm. Last confirmed seen in Henderson, Kentucky. March 12, 2017. Still listed as missing. Still waiting to be found. If you have information, any information, about the disappearance of Will Adams 3, please contact the Henderson Police Department or call the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-THE-LOST. You can also submit tips to NamUs at namus.nij.ojp.gov. You can do this anonymously. You can do this tonight. Before you close this video, If this story moved you, if you think about Will Adams tonight, about the river town in Kentucky and the tattoo on a 16-year-old boy's arm, and the 8 years of silence that have followed his disappearance, share it. Put it in front of someone who might know something. That is the one action that costs nothing and might mean everything. Like the video if it stayed with you. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this one. Stories of the people who fall through the cracks of public attention. The cases that deserve more light than they received. Because the light matters. It always has. The Ohio River is still moving north of Henderson, Kentucky. Dark and wide and patient, the way it always is. The town is still there on its southern bank, carrying its history, carrying its ordinary life. And somewhere in that ordinary life, the question that Will Adams left behind is still asking to be answered. 8 years. One word. Family. Someone knows something. Come forward.